The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Sarah Thompson realized the driver had left her standing in the middle of Helena, Montana, with nothing but the scorched dress on her back and $3 in her pocket. She watched the coach disappear down the rutted street, carrying away the last connection to her old life, and felt the weight of complete desolation settle over her shoulders like a shroud in the autumn of 1882. The fire had taken everything. Her father's ranch in Wyoming, the cattle, the house her grandfather had built with his own hands, and worst of all, her father himself. Samuel Thompson had died trying to save the barn, and Sarah had barely escaped with her life. The banker had wasted no time claiming the land for unpaid debts she had never known existed, and her father's business partner had vanished with what little money remained in their accounts. At 22 years old, Sarah found herself utterly alone in a world that had no patience for penniless women. Helena bustled around her with the organized chaos of a mining town that had grown fat on gold and silver. Men in dusty work clothes shouldered past her, their boots heavy on the wooden sidewalks. Women in fine dresses walked arm in arm, their parasols casting shadows that seemed to mock her situation. Sarah's stomach clenched with hunger she had been ignoring for 2 days, and she knew she needed to find work immediately, or tonight would be spent sleeping in an alley. She walked the main street, stopping at every establishment that looked remotely respectable. The general store needed no help. The hotel had just hired 2 girls last week. The restaurant owner took one look at her soot-stained dress and sent her away before she could finish asking. By the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Sarah's feet ached and her throat was dry from repeated rejections. The saloon loomed ahead, and Sarah felt her stomach turn. She knew what kind of work they offered women with nowhere else to go, but desperation had its own gravitational pull. She stood outside the swinging doors, listening to the tinny piano and rough laughter from within, trying to gather the courage to enter. I would not recommend that path if you have any other choice. The voice came from beside her, deep and measured, with an accent that suggested education despite the cowboy attire. Sarah turned to find a man leaning against the hitching post, one boot propped on the rail. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His clothing was worn but well-maintained, his hat pushed back on his head. He looked to be perhaps 5 or 6 years her senior, with the kind of weathered face that came from years working under the Montana sun. "I do not recall asking for your opinion," Sarah said, lifting her chin despite the heat that rose to her cheeks. "No, you did not." He straightened from the post, and she noticed he moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to handling unpredictable animals. "But I give it freely nonetheless. A woman who looks like she has been through hell and back does not belong in a place that will only make things worse. You know nothing about me or what I have been through." Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended, brittle with exhaustion and fear. "No, but I recognize desperation when I see it." He studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. "You are new to Helena. You have traveled far in poor conditions. You have no money and no prospects, or you would not be standing outside the Lucky Dollar contemplating a decision you will regret for the rest of your life." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "If you have finished cataloging my failures, I have business to attend to. What if I told you there was another option? Then I would ask what you want in return, because nothing in this world comes without a price." The man's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "A fair question. My name is Vincent Garrett. I own a ranch about 8 miles north of here. I need help with the household work: cooking, cleaning, mending. The pay is not generous, but it includes room and board in a separate cabin on the property. Sarah stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or hidden intentions. Why would you offer work to a complete stranger? Because I need the help, and you need the work. Because I would rather see someone make an honest living than throw their life away in a place like that. Vincent gestured toward the saloon. Because my mother taught me that when you have the ability to help someone, you have the responsibility to do so. And you expect nothing else from me. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. No other services beyond household work. Vincent's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes that might have been anger or hurt. I am offering you employment, miss. Nothing more and nothing less. If you want the position, it is yours. If not, I wish you well in whatever path you choose. He turned to leave, and Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. This was quite possibly the only decent opportunity that would come her way, and her pride was about to chase it off. Wait. The word came out hoarse. I apologize. I've had a difficult few days, but that is no excuse for rudeness. If your offer is genuine, I would like to accept it. Vincent turned back, his expression softening. My home is yours if you will take it. No strings. You work for your keep, and beyond that you answer to no one but yourself. Those are my terms. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had not expected kindness, and the sudden relief of it threatened to crack the careful control she had maintained since the fire. Have you eaten today? Vincent asked, and when she shook her head, he continued. There is a decent restaurant 2 streets over. Let me buy you dinner, and then we will ride out to the ranch. I have supplies to load into the wagon, so we will not leave for another hour. I cannot ask you to spend money on me when I have not even started working yet. You are not asking. I am offering. And I need you to have strength enough to sit a wagon for an hour without falling off the bench. There was no mockery in his tone, only practical concern. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. Sarah tried to eat slowly despite her hunger, aware that Vincent sat across from her nursing a coffee and pretending not to notice how quickly her plate emptied. He asked no questions about her past, instead telling her about the ranch and what her duties would entail. It is just me and my brother, Caleb. He is 19 and handles most of the outdoor work. We run about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. The house is nothing fancy, but it is solid. The cabin where you will stay was built for the previous foreman, but he moved into town last month to marry. It has a stove, a bed, a table, and a chair. You will take your meals with us in the main house unless you prefer otherwise. It sounds more than adequate, Sarah said, and meant it. After contemplating a night in an alley, a private cabin sounded like a palace. They loaded the wagon as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Bags of flour and sugar, coffee, salt pork, dried beans, and various tools and supplies filled the bed. Vincent helped Sarah onto the bench with a careful hand on her elbow, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The road north wound through rolling grassland that stretched toward mountains purple with distance. The air cooled as they left town behind, and Sarah breathed it in, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Vincent drove with easy competence, the horses responding to his voice and the lightest touch of the reins. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, explaining the history of the area and the neighboring ranches. The Hendersons have the spread to the east. Good people, 3 sons and 2 daughters. The youngest boy is around your age, I think. To the west is the Bar M, owned by Marcus Fletcher. He is a hard man but honest in his dealings. We share grazing rights on the creek that runs between our properties. Sarah listened, grateful that he did not press her for conversation, but also did not leave her sitting in uncomfortable silence. As the wagon crested a low hill, Vincent gestured ahead. There. That is home. The ranch house sat in a small valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds by the surrounding hills. It was a sturdy two-story structure built from logs, with a wide porch across the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including a large barn, a stable, and what she assumed was the cabin Vincent had mentioned. Fences marked out corrals and pastures, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is beautiful," Sarah said, and was surprised to find she meant it. There was something solid and reassuring about the place, a sense of permanence that had been missing from her life since the fire. A young man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and lanky with the same dark hair as Vincent but a face that still held boyish angles. He waved and jogged over as Vincent pulled the wagon to a stop. "You were gone longer than expected. I was starting to think you had decided to stay in town for the evening." Caleb's grin faded as he noticed Sarah. "Who is this?" "Caleb, this is Miss Sarah Thompson. She will be helping with the household work. Sarah, my brother Caleb." Vincent climbed down from the wagon and began unloading supplies. Caleb's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly and tipped his hat to Sarah. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Thompson. Welcome to the Garrett Ranch." He turned to his brother with a meaningful look. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" The brothers moved a few feet away, and though they kept their voices low, Sarah could hear the urgent tone of Caleb's questions and Vincent's patient responses. She busied herself with smoothing her ruined dress, trying not to feel like an intruder. When they returned, Caleb's expression had shifted to something more welcoming. "I apologize for my reaction, Miss Thompson. Vincent explained that you are new to Helena and needed work. I hope you will be comfortable here." "Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity." Sarah accepted Vincent's hand as he helped her down from the wagon. "Let me show you the cabin, and then we can get you settled with some proper supplies." Vincent led her to the small building she had noticed earlier. Inside, it was exactly as he had described, simple but clean, with a narrow bed against one wall, a pot-bellied stove, a rough table with a single chair and a few shelves. A window looked out toward the main house, and another faced the mountains. "I know it is not much," Vincent began, but Sarah interrupted him. "It is perfect, truly." She ran her hand over the table, solid wood worn smooth with use. "I have a place to sleep and a door I can lock. That is more than I had this morning." Something in Vincent's expression suggested he understood more than she had said. "There are blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed, and I will bring over some basics for cooking. You should have your own space and your own supplies. Tomorrow I will take you into town and you can purchase whatever else you need. I will advance you the money from your wages. That is very generous." Sarah's throat felt tight again. "It is practical. You cannot work if you do not have what you need." Vincent moved toward the door. "Get some rest tonight. We keep early hours here, but tomorrow morning is soon enough to start. Breakfast is at 6, if you care to join us." After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and let herself truly feel the enormity of what had happened. This morning she had been standing in Helena with nothing and no prospects. Now she had a job, a place to sleep, and an employer who seemed decent, if somewhat reserved. It felt too good to be true, and she waited for the other boot to drop. But that night, alone in the small cabin with the stars visible through the window, Sarah slept better than she had since before the fire. The bed was comfortable, the blankets warm, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. She woke before dawn from long habit and dressed in the same scorched dress with a sense of resignation. Vincent had mentioned taking her to town for supplies, and a new dress would have to be the first purchase, regardless of the cost. She could not continue to wear the ruin of her old life. The main house showed lamplight in the kitchen windows, and Sarah made her way across the yard as the sky began to lighten in the east. She knocked softly, and Vincent opened the door, already dressed for the day's work. "Good morning. You are up early." He stepped aside to let her enter. The kitchen was large and well appointed, with a massive iron stove, a long table that could seat 8 or more, and cabinets that lined 2 walls. It was also, Sarah noticed, somewhat chaotic. Dishes were piled in a basin, the floor needed sweeping, and various items seemed to have been placed wherever was convenient rather than where they belonged. "I see why you needed help," she said, and was rewarded by a slight smile from Vincent. "Caleb and I are adequate cooks, but neither of us has much talent for keeping things organized." He moved to the stove where a coffee pot already bubbled. "Have some coffee. I will show you where everything is, and then you can decide what you want to tackle first." Caleb stumbled into the kitchen looking half asleep, and the 3 of them ate a simple breakfast of fried eggs and toasted bread. The brothers had an easy rapport, occasionally arguing over the day's tasks, but clearly comfortable with each other. Sarah found herself relaxing, listening to their conversation about cattle that needed moving to a different pasture and a fence line that required mending. After breakfast, Vincent showed her around the house while Caleb headed out to start the morning chores. The building was well constructed, but showed the wear of 2 men living without a woman's touch. Sarah made mental notes of everything that needed attention, already planning how to bring order to the chaos. "Before you start on any of this, we should go into town and get you properly outfitted." Vincent retrieved his hat from a hook by the door. "Make a list of everything you need, and do not be conservative about it. You will be working hard, and you need the right supplies." The trip to Helena felt different in daylight, with Vincent beside her and the knowledge that she had a place to return to. In the general store, Sarah tried to be practical with her selections, but Vincent kept adding items to the pile. Fabric for 3 new dresses, undergarments, a good pair of boots, a warm coat for the coming winter, a hairbrush, soap, and a dozen other necessities. When she protested the expense, he gave her a level look. "You cannot work effectively if you do not have what you need. This is an investment in the household, not charity. Besides, I am keeping a tally, and it will be deducted from your wages over time." His tone left no room for argument. Sarah also selected fabric for new shirts for both brothers, needles and thread, and various kitchen supplies she had noticed were lacking. If she was going to manage their household, she would do it properly. Back at the ranch, Sarah changed into one of the new dresses, a simple gray cotton with a white collar that fit far better than anything she had owned in months. She pinned up her dark hair and rolled up her sleeves, then set to work on the kitchen with a sense of purpose that felt remarkably good after weeks of helplessness. By the time the brothers came in for dinner, the kitchen gleamed. Dishes were washed and put away, the floor was swept and mopped, surfaces were scrubbed, and a pot of beef stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with savory smells. Sarah had also baked bread, the loaves golden and fragrant on the counter. "My God," Caleb said, stopping in the doorway. "I forgot what this room looked like clean." Vincent said nothing, but Sarah saw something shift in his expression as he looked around the transformed space. "You have been busy. This is what you hired me for." Sarah ladled stew into bowls. "Tomorrow I will start on the rest of the house." Over dinner, Caleb peppered her with questions about where she had learned to cook and keep house. Sarah kept her answers vague, not ready to share the full story of her loss. Vincent, she noticed, asked nothing but listened carefully to everything she did say. The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah woke before dawn, prepared breakfast for the three of them, and spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and generally bringing order to the household. The brothers worked from sunrise to sunset on the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. In the evenings, they ate together, and Sarah began to learn their personalities beyond the basic courtesies. Caleb was easygoing and talkative, full of stories and jokes that made her laugh despite herself. He treated her like a younger sister, teasing her gently and always quick to help carry something heavy or reach something on a high shelf. Vincent was quieter, more reserved, but Sarah found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. He moved with careful precision, wasted no words, but when he spoke, people listened. He was patient with the animals, kind to his brother, and unfailingly courteous to her. She also noticed the way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she was not aware. It was not the predatory gaze she had learned to recognize and avoid, but something else. Something that made her heart beat a little faster. 3 weeks after her arrival, Sarah was mending a shirt on the porch when Vincent rode up from checking the north pasture. He dismounted and led his horse to the trough, and Sarah found her eyes drawn to the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the easy strength in his hands as he loosened the cinch on his saddle. "You are staring." Caleb's voice made her jump, and she realized he had come around the corner of the house without her noticing. "I was not," Sarah said, heat flooding her cheeks. "It is all right if you were. Vincent is a good man, the best I know, actually." Caleb sat beside her on the porch steps. "He does not let many people close, but when he does, he is loyal to the bone. I work for him, that is all." Sarah focused fiercely on the shirt in her lap. "If you say so." Caleb's tone suggested he did not believe her for a moment. "But for what it is worth, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Sarah could respond, Vincent approached, leading his horse. "What are you two conspiring about?" "Just telling Miss Sarah about the dance in town next Saturday." Caleb grinned at his brother's raised eyebrow. "The Hendersons are hosting it at their place. The whole valley will be there. You should both come." "I have too much work to do," Sarah said quickly. The thought of attending a social gathering terrified her. She had no idea how to explain who she was or why she had appeared in Helena with nothing. "Everyone works too much. That is why we have dances, to remember there is more to life than labor." Caleb stood and dusted off his pants. "Think about it. It would do you good to meet the neighbors, and Vincent could use a reminder of how to smile." That night, Sarah lay in her bed in the small cabin and thought about what Caleb had said. She had been so focused on survival, on earning her keep and staying useful, that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feeling in her chest whenever Vincent was near. It was foolish, she told herself. He had offered her employment, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome and kind, and that his rare smiles made her feel warm all over was irrelevant. But she could not deny that something was growing between them, something neither of them had acknowledged aloud. The way he always served her coffee before pouring his own. The way she always mended his shirts first. The conversations that stretched longer each evening, the two of them lingering at the table after Caleb had gone to bed. The accidental touches that seemed to happen more frequently. His hand on her elbow as he helped her down from the wagon, her fingers brushing his as she passed him a plate. The following day, Vincent found her in the garden she had started behind the house, pulling weeds from the small plot she intended to turn into a vegetable patch before winter arrived. He stood watching for a moment before speaking. "Caleb tells me he invited you to the dance." Sarah sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "He did, but I do not think it would be appropriate for me to attend." "Why not?" Vincent crouched beside her, picking up the trowel she had borrowed from the barn. "Because I am your employee, people might talk." People always talk. If you do not want to go, that is one thing. But if you are staying away because you are worried about appearances, that would be a shame. He dug at a particularly stubborn weed. You have been working hard since you arrived. You deserve an evening of enjoyment. I am not sure I remember how to enjoy myself. The admission came out before Sarah could stop it. Vincent's hand stilled and he turned to look at her. How long has it been since the fire? 5 weeks, but it feels like years. Sarah found herself telling him what she had not told anyone, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. She told him about her father, the ranch, the fire, the debts, the betrayal of the business partner, the feeling of watching her entire world burn to ash and having no power to stop it. Vincent listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finally fell silent, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I am sorry you went through that. No one should have to endure such loss alone. His voice was rough. But you are not alone anymore. You have a place here for as long as you want it. As your employee, Sarah said, but her voice came out uncertain. As whatever you want to be. Vincent's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand and Sarah's breath caught. When I saw you standing outside that saloon, I told myself I was just offering work to someone in need. But that was only part of the truth. What is the rest of it? The rest is that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that moment. The way you lifted your chin despite being terrified. The way you have thrown yourself into making this house a home. The way you laugh at Caleb's terrible jokes and always make sure we eat proper meals. He paused, and Sarah could see him gathering courage. The way you look at me sometimes when you think I am not watching. I did not realize you had noticed. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it. I notice everything about you. Vincent lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. I know it has not been long, and I know the circumstances of your arrival were difficult. If you need time, I will wait. If you do not feel the same way, I will respect that. But I needed you to know that my feelings for you go beyond that of an employer. Sarah looked at him, this man who had offered her everything when she had nothing, who had asked for nothing in return, who looked at her like she was precious. I feel the same way. I have tried to tell myself it was gratitude or relief, but it is more than that. Then come to the dance with me, not as my employee, but as the woman I am courting. Vincent's eyes held hope and vulnerability. Yes, Sarah said, and was rewarded by a smile that transformed his face. The days leading up to the dance passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and anticipation. Sarah continued her work, but everything felt different now that the unspoken thing between her and Vincent had been acknowledged. He found more excuses to be near her, helping her hang laundry or fetch water from the well. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Caleb watched them with barely concealed amusement, but had the good grace not to comment. Sarah used some of the fabric Vincent had bought to make herself a new dress for the dance, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She styled her hair carefully, pinning it up with the new combs she had purchased. When she stepped out of her cabin on Saturday evening, Vincent and Caleb were waiting by the wagon. Vincent's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His eyes widened, and he seemed to forget how to speak for a moment. "You look beautiful," he finally managed. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sarah replied, taking in his pressed shirt and newly trimmed hair. The Henderson ranch was ablaze with lanterns when they arrived, and music already spilled out into the evening air. Dozens of wagons and horses crowded the yard, and people in their finest clothes streamed toward the large barn that had been cleared for dancing. Sarah felt her nervousness return, as Vincent helped her down from the wagon. She had no idea what she would say when people asked about her, no prepared story to explain her presence. Vincent must have sensed her anxiety because he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Just be yourself. That is more than enough." The Hendersons were welcoming, a cheerful couple with lively children who treated everyone like family. Mrs. Henderson took one look at Sarah and pulled her into a hug. "You must be the young woman who has been helping the Garrett boys. Bless you, dear. I have been telling Vincent for months that they needed someone to keep that house from falling down around their ears." Other neighbors introduced themselves, and Sarah found that most people were too polite to pry into her background. The women welcomed her into their conversations, and the men treated her with respectful courtesy. When the music started, Vincent claimed her hand for the first dance. Sarah had not danced since before her father died, but Vincent was a competent partner who guided her through the steps with patient confidence. As they moved together, Sarah felt the last of her tension melt away. This was real. She was not just an employee or a charity case. She was a woman being courted by a good man, dancing at a community gathering where people were beginning to accept her as one of their own. "You are smiling," Vincent said, pulling her a bit closer. "I am happy." The realization surprised her even as she said it. "For the first time since the fire, I am actually happy." "Good. You deserve to be happy." Vincent's hand was warm on her waist, and Sarah wondered what it would be like if he kissed her. She did not have to wonder long. When the dance ended and Vincent walked her outside for some air, he led her to a quiet spot away from the lantern light. The moon hung full and bright overhead, painting everything in silver. "Sarah," Vincent said, and there was something in his voice that made her shiver despite the warm night. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering, Sarah rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Vincent's arms came around her, pulling her close. Sarah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, every nerve in her body alive with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it is fast, and I know you might not be ready to hear it, but I needed to say it. I am falling in love with you too." Sarah's voice shook with emotion. "You gave me hope when I had none. You treated me with respect when you had no reason to. You made me feel like I was worth something again. You were always worth something. I just helped you remember it." Vincent kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. They danced several more times that evening, and Sarah could feel the eyes of the community on them, assessing and approving. Mrs. Henderson winked at her as she passed, and Mr. Fletcher nodded to Vincent with something that looked like respect. By the time they loaded back into the wagon for the ride home, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere for the first time since the fire. Caleb, who had spent most of the evening dancing with one of the Henderson daughters, dozed in the back of the wagon. Vincent drove with one hand on the reins and the other holding Sarah's. The night was clear and cool, and the stars seemed impossibly bright. "Things are going to change now," Vincent said quietly. "Not with your work or your position. You can keep doing exactly what you have been doing for as long as you want, but I want to court you properly. I want everyone to know that you are important to me. I would like that." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling safe and content. The autumn passed in a golden haze. Sarah continued managing the household, but the dynamic had shifted. She and Vincent stole moments together whenever they could, walking in the evenings after supper, sitting together on the porch watching the sunset, finding excuses to touch each other in passing. Caleb teased them mercilessly but clearly approved of the relationship. Sarah began to truly integrate into the community. She attended church services in Helena with the brothers, joined the women's sewing circle that met weekly at different ranches, and helped with the harvest celebrations. People stopped asking where she came from and started treating her like she had always been there. The first snow fell in late November, transforming the landscape into something magical and treacherous. The brothers worked long hours preparing for winter, moving cattle to protected pastures and stockpiling feed and supplies. Sarah filled the root cellar with preserved vegetables from her garden and spent her evenings baking and cooking meals that would stick to their ribs during the cold months ahead. One evening in early December, Vincent asked her to walk with him despite the cold. He led her to the barn, where he had set up a small shelter with blankets and a lantern. They sat together looking out at the snow-covered ranch, and Vincent pulled something from his pocket. "My mother gave this to my father when they were courting. She told him it was a promise that she would wait for him to be ready to marry her." He opened his hand to reveal a delicate gold locket. "After my father died, she gave it to me and told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Sarah's heart stopped. "Vincent, I am not asking you to marry me tonight. I know we have not been courting long and you have been through so much, but I want you to have this as a symbol of my intentions." He opened the locket, revealing two tiny portraits, one of a young man and one of a young woman. "These are my parents. I want you to carry them with you as a reminder that love can last, that it is worth believing in, and that I am serious about building a future with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Vincent fastened the locket around her neck. "It is beautiful. I will treasure it." "Does that mean you feel the same way? That you can see a future with me?" Vincent's voice was vulnerable. "I can. I never thought I would find this after losing everything, but you have shown me that endings can also be beginnings." Sarah kissed him, tasting snowflakes on his lips. They began making plans, talking about what their life together might look like. Vincent wanted to wait until spring to marry, to give Sarah time to be certain, and to give the community time to accept their union without question. Sarah agreed, though she already knew her heart. She had gone from having nothing and nowhere to go to having a home, a community, and a man who loved her completely. Christmas came, and Sarah worked for days preparing a feast. She made pies and cakes, roasted a goose that Vincent had traded for, and decorated the house with pine branches and red ribbons. On Christmas morning, the three of them exchanged simple gifts. Sarah gave the brothers shirts she had sewn, Caleb gave her a set of hair combs he had purchased in town, and Vincent gave her a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. "You have been through so much, and sometimes writing helps make sense of things." Sarah's gift to Vincent was more personal. She had sketched the ranch from memory and framed it with wood Caleb had helped her prepare. Vincent stared at it for a long moment before pulling her into his arms. "It is perfect. You have a real talent." He hung it over the fireplace in the main room, where it would be the first thing anyone saw when entering the house. The winter was long and sometimes harsh, but Sarah had never been happier. She and Vincent grew closer with each passing week, learning each other's habits and quirks, discovering the comfortable intimacy that came with shared daily life. They talked about everything, their hopes and fears and dreams. Vincent told her about his parents, who had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 23, leaving him to raise Caleb alone. Sarah told him about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride and rope alongside the cowboys her father employed, and the dreams she had harbored of attending college back east before reality and responsibility made that impossible. "You regret not going?" Vincent asked one snowy evening as they sat by the fire. "I did for a long time, but now I think everything happened the way it was meant to. If I had gone east, I would never have met you." Sarah looked up from the sock she was darning. Do you ever wish you had done something different? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had sold the ranch after my parents died and taken Caleb somewhere else. But this is the only home he has ever known, and I could not take that from him. Vincent paused. And if I had left, I would not have been here when you needed help. Do you think fate is real? That we were meant to find each other? Sarah set aside her mending. I think we make our own fate through the choices we make. I chose to offer you help because it was the right thing to do. You chose to accept it because you are brave enough to take a chance. Everything that came after was us choosing each other again and again. Vincent held out his hand and Sarah took it, moving to sit beside him on the settee. I like that answer better than fate, she said. It means we are responsible for our own happiness. And are you happy? Vincent's arm came around her shoulders, more than I ever thought possible. Sarah nestled against him, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal the brown grass beneath. The ranch came alive with activity as calves were born, and the herd needed constant attention. Sarah threw open the windows of the house to air out the winter staleness, and began planning her garden with expanded ambition. Vincent had said he wanted to wait until spring to propose properly, and Sarah found herself watching him for signs that the moment was approaching. She was not disappointed. On a warm day in late April, Vincent asked her to ride out with him to check on a section of fence. They rode for an hour, climbing higher into the hills until they reached a meadow carpeted with wildflowers. This is one of my favorite places on the ranch, Vincent said, helping Sarah dismount. I used to come here when I needed to think. They walked through the flowers, and Vincent talked about his plans for expanding the herd and building a larger barn. Sarah listened, sensing that he was working up to something. When they reached a small stream that bubbled through the meadow, Vincent stopped and turned to face her. Sarah Thompson, you came into my life when I did not even know I was looking for someone. You have made my house a home, brought light and laughter back into my life, and shown me what it means to truly love someone. He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. Will you marry me? Will you take my name and share my life and let me spend the rest of my days making you happy? Sarah's vision blurred with tears. Yes, yes, I will marry you. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. Sarah laughed, feeling joy so intense it was almost painful. When he set her down, they kissed with the warm sun on their faces and the sound of birdsong all around them. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Helena, with what seemed like the entire valley in attendance. Sarah wore a dress of cream silk that Mrs. Henderson and the other women had helped her sew, and Vincent wore a new suit that made him look almost unfamiliar until she saw the love in his eyes. Caleb stood up as best man, grinning throughout the entire ceremony. The community threw them a reception at the Henderson Ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Sarah danced with Vincent, with Caleb, with Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Henderson and half the other men in the valley. When Vincent finally claimed her for the last waltz of the evening, she was exhausted but radiantly happy. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett?" Vincent asked against her ear. The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, Mr. Garrett, take me home." They returned to the ranch under a canopy of stars, and Sarah felt the symmetry of it. She had arrived at this place with nothing, desperate and alone, and now she was returning as Vincent's wife, surrounded by love and community and possibility. Vincent carried her over the threshold of the main house, which would now be their shared home. Caleb had tactfully announced he would be spending the night in town, giving them privacy. Sarah looked around the familiar space, seeing it with new eyes. This was truly hers now, not as an employee or even as a guest, but as the mistress of the house. "Are you nervous?" Vincent asked, setting her down gently. "A little," Sarah admitted. "Are you terrified?" Vincent's smile was crooked. "I do not want to do anything wrong. I do not think there is a wrong way when two people love each other as much as we do." Sarah reached up to loosen his tie. "We will figure it out together." And they did, discovering each other with gentle patience, turning nervousness into laughter and laughter into passion. When Sarah finally fell asleep in Vincent's arms, she felt complete in a way she had not known was possible. The first year of their marriage was both challenging and wonderful. Sarah learned the rhythms of being a wife alongside being a household manager. And Vincent learned to share his space and his life with someone who had opinions about everything from cattle management to how to organize the barn. They argued sometimes, usually about small things that did not matter, and learned how to apologize and compromise. But mostly they laughed and worked and built a life together that felt solid and real. Caleb began courting the oldest Henderson daughter, Emma, and spent more time away from the ranch. Sarah encouraged the relationship, recognizing that the young man needed his own life separate from his brother. When Caleb announced his engagement that fall, Sarah helped Emma plan the wedding and prepared to welcome her sister-in-law into the family. Sarah's own news came a month before Caleb's wedding. She had been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings. When Mrs. Henderson suggested the obvious cause, Sarah counted back the weeks and realized it was possible. A trip to the doctor in Helena confirmed it. She was expecting a baby, due in the early spring. She told Vincent that evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. For a moment he simply stared at her and Sarah felt a flutter of concern. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "Sarah, this is the best news. I cannot believe it. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, thrilled, grateful, amazed. Vincent kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I love you so much." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester, and she found the winter exhausting in a way the previous one had not been. Vincent hovered over her constantly, insisting she rest and refusing to let her do any heavy work. Sarah found his protectiveness both endearing and frustrating, but she could not deny that she appreciated his care. Caleb and Emma were married in a ceremony that mirrored Sarah and Vincent's, and the young couple moved into the cabin that had been Sarah's when she first arrived. Sarah found it poignant to see Emma settling into the space where her own new life had begun, and she made sure the cabin was well stocked with everything the newlyweds might need. Winter gave way to spring, and Sarah grew rounder. The women of the valley rallied around her, bringing gifts for the baby and sharing advice about childbirth and motherhood. Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered 5 children, promised to attend the birth along with the doctor from town. On a warm day in late March, Sarah went into labor. Vincent paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Henderson and the doctor attended to his wife, looking pale and terrified. Caleb tried to distract him with talk of the ranch work, but Vincent could not focus on anything except the sounds coming from upstairs. After 8 hours that felt like 8 years, the baby's cry finally rang out. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom with a smile. "You have a son, Vincent. A big, healthy boy, and Sarah did beautifully. She is tired but fine." Vincent took the stairs 3 at a time. Sarah lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, looking exhausted and radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Vincent approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. "Come meet your son," Sarah said softly, and Vincent sat carefully on the edge of the bed. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same whiskey color as his father's. Vincent reached out a tentative finger, and the baby's tiny hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours. What should we name him?" Sarah adjusted the blanket so Vincent could see the baby's face more clearly. They had discussed names for months without settling on one, but looking at his son, Vincent knew immediately what felt right. "Samuel." "After your father, Samuel Vincent Garrett." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I know you wanted to use your father's name. Your father should be honored too. He raised an incredible daughter, and I want our son to carry his name forward." Vincent kissed her forehead. "Besides, we will have plenty of other children to name. Let me recover from this one first before we plan the next," Sarah said, but she was smiling. Little Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had a set of lungs that could wake the entire household when he was hungry. Vincent was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with the baby at night and marveling over every yawn and stretch. Sarah watched her husband fall in love with their son and felt her own love for Vincent deepen in ways she had not imagined possible. The ranch prospered. With Caleb's help and occasional hired hands during busy seasons, Vincent expanded the herd and improved the property. Sarah managed the household with capable efficiency, even with a baby to care for. Emma proved to be a good friend and helpful neighbor, often watching Samuel so Sarah could attend to other tasks. When Samuel was 18 months old, Sarah discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Margaret, after Vincent's mother. Grace had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, and she quickly had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family and community. Samuel grew into a serious little boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about ranching almost before he could walk. Grace was more interested in the house and garden, spending hours with Sarah learning to cook and tend the vegetables. When Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, Sarah gave birth to twin boys, James and Jonathan, who brought chaos and laughter in equal measure. The ranch had to expand to accommodate the growing family. Vincent built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Caleb and Emma had children of their own, 2 daughters and a son, and the ranch became a lively place full of children's voices and activity. Sarah sometimes stood on the porch in the evenings, watching Vincent teach Samuel to rope or Grace help Caleb's oldest daughter with her reading, and marveled at how much her life had changed. She thought about that terrified young woman standing outside the saloon in Helena, with nothing but desperation and $3, and could hardly believe she was the same person. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "How far we have come, how different everything is from that day you found me." Sarah leaned back against him. "I had nowhere to go, and you gave me a home. You gave me a home too. This was just a house before you arrived. You made it something more." Vincent kissed the side of her neck. "No regrets, not a single one. Well, except maybe letting you talk me into having 4 children. Sarah turned in his arms, smiling to soften the words. "You love them all, and you know it." Vincent grinned at her. "Besides, we make beautiful children together." "We do," Sarah agreed. "We make a beautiful life together." The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Samuel showed a natural talent for working with cattle and horses, and by the time he was 15, he was as capable as any of the hired hands. Grace had inherited her mother's organizational skills and her father's head for numbers, and she helped keep the ranch accounts in order. The twins were still young, but showed signs of having their own distinct personalities and interests. Vincent and Sarah aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still stole moments alone whenever they could, walking in the meadow where Vincent had proposed or sitting together on the porch after the children were in bed. Their hair began to gray, and lines appeared around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun and laughing together. But Vincent still looked at Sarah the way he had that first night when he offered her a place to stay, and Sarah still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. The community changed around them. Helena continued to grow, and the railroad brought new people and new opportunities. Some of the old ranchers sold their land and moved to town or back east. But the Garrett Ranch remained, solid and enduring, a place where family and hard work and love created something that would last for generations. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Sarah by taking her back to the meadow. It looked much the same as it had the day he proposed, carpeted with wildflowers and alive with birdsong. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Sarah had packed, talking and laughing like they had all the time in the world. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Sarah asked, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the sky. "I said a lot of things that day." Vincent settled beside her, propping himself on one elbow. "You said your home was mine if I would take it. No strings." Sarah turned her head to look at him. "That was the moment I knew you were different. You offered me everything and asked for nothing in return. I wanted you to have a choice. I wanted you to stay because you wanted to, not because you had to." Vincent traced the lines of her face with gentle fingers. "I loved you even then, though I did not recognize it right away. I loved you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you stopped me from going into that saloon." Sarah caught his hand and pressed a kiss to his palm. "Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to land." Vincent leaned down and kissed her, slow and sweet. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about their children and their plans for the future. Samuel was courting a girl from town, and they expected an engagement announcement soon. Grace had been accepted to a teaching college and would be leaving in the fall. The twins were 13 and full of energy and mischief. There were grandchildren to look forward to, and years of life still ahead. As they rode back to the ranch in the golden light of evening, Sarah felt complete contentment. She had started with nothing, lost everything, and found something better than she had ever imagined possible. She had a husband who loved her, children who made her proud, a home that was truly hers, and a community that had accepted her as one of their own. The ranch house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney where Grace was preparing dinner. The sound of the twins arguing drifted across the yard, and Sarah could see Caleb's family walking over from their cabin for the anniversary celebration. This was her life, built from the ashes of loss and despair, grown strong through love and determination. Vincent helped her down from her horse, and they stood together looking at the home they had built. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Sarah said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." That evening, surrounded by family and friends, Sarah and Vincent renewed their vows. It was not a formal ceremony, just a moment during dinner when Vincent stood and asked for everyone's attention. He talked about the day he met Sarah, about how she had transformed his life and his home, about how every day with her was a gift he never took for granted. Then he turned to Sarah and took her hands. "20 years ago, I offered you my home with no strings attached. Tonight I want to renew that offer, though the strings have multiplied considerably." He gestured to the children around the table, drawing laughter. "My home is yours, my life is yours, my heart is yours, for as long as we both shall live." Sarah stood, tears streaming down her face. 20 years ago, I had nowhere left to go. You gave me a home, but more than that, you gave me hope. You showed me that endings can be beginnings, that loss can lead to love, and that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. My home is yours, my life is yours, my heart is yours. Forever. They kissed to applause and cheers from their family, and Sarah felt the perfect rightness of the moment. This was what happiness looked like, built day by day through choice and commitment and love. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as life always does. Sarah's mother-in-law's locket remained around her neck, a constant reminder of the promise Vincent had made and kept. They welcomed grandchildren, watched their children build their own lives and face the challenges that came with aging and change. But through it all, they had each other, and that made everything bearable. When Sarah was in her 60s, she began writing down the story of her life. She filled the journal Vincent had given her all those years ago, and several more besides, wanting her children and grandchildren to know where she came from and how she had found her way home. She wrote about the fire and the loss, about standing outside the saloon in Helena with $3 and no prospects, about the cowboy who had offered her everything and asked for nothing in return. She wrote about falling in love, about building a life from nothing, about the power of kindness and courage and choosing to hope even when hope seemed foolish. And she wrote about Vincent, the man who had seen her at her lowest moment and offered her not pity but partnership, not charity but chance. Vincent found her one evening sitting at the desk in their bedroom, writing by lamplight. "Still working on your memoirs?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I want them to understand," Sarah said, setting down her pen. "I want our grandchildren to know that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a chance for something better. That one moment of courage can change everything. That love is worth believing in. You have lived a life worth documenting." Vincent took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the wedding ring she had worn for over 40 years. "I am proud of you, Sarah, proud of who you are and what you have built." "We built it together," Sarah corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we created as partners." "Then I am proud of us." Vincent smiled at her, and Sarah saw the young man who had offered her a job and a place to stay, who had looked at her like she was worth something when she felt worthless. "I love you, Sarah Garrett. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you to the end." "And I love you," Sarah said, rising to kiss him. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, more even." Vincent pulled her into his lap, and Sarah laughed, feeling young despite her gray hair and lined face. "You are the best decision I ever made, Sarah Thompson Garrett." They sat together as the lamp burned low, talking and remembering, planning and dreaming. Outside, the ranch settled into night, and Sarah could hear the familiar sounds that had become the backdrop of her life. The cattle lowing in the distance, the wind in the trees, the creak of the house around them. These were the sounds of home, of safety, of love. As the years advanced, Sarah and Vincent slowed down but never stopped. They handed more responsibility to Samuel, who ran the ranch with the same dedication his father had shown. They spent their days surrounded by children and grandchildren, passing on stories and skills and love. They took walks together every evening when weather permitted, visiting their meadow when they could make the ride, content to walk around the ranch when they could not, one particularly beautiful spring day, when Sarah was 70 and Vincent 76. They took a wagon up to the meadow. The wildflowers were in full bloom, just as they had been 50 years earlier when Vincent had proposed. They spread a blanket and sat together, holding hands and watching the clouds drift across the bright blue sky. "You remember the first time you brought me here?" Sarah asked. "I remember everything about our life together," Vincent said. "Every moment, every conversation, every smile. You are written on my heart, Sarah. And you on mine." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I could not have imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach in Helena that my life would turn out like this. I was so scared, so lost. I thought my life was over. But it was just beginning." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "The best parts were just beginning. Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked. "Things you wish you had done differently?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, considering. "No. Oh, there are small things I might change if I could. Times I was impatient or thoughtless. Arguments we had that seem silly now, but the big things? No. I would choose you again every time. I would offer you that job again, knowing it would lead to this. I would fall in love with you again, marry you again, build this life with you again. No regrets." "Good," Sarah said, "because I feel the same way. Everything we went through, all the hard times and the good times, they made us who we are. They brought us here." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, neither of them speaking much, just being together in the place that held so many memories. When they finally returned to the ranch, their family was waiting with a surprise celebration for no particular reason, except that they were loved. Sarah and Vincent lived several more good years, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, holidays and everyday moments. They faced losses too, as old friends passed away and the world changed around them. But they faced everything together, their love as strong in their final years as it had been in their first. When Vincent finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Sarah grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had his love letters, his journal entries, 57 years of memories, and the family they had built together. She wore his wedding ring on a chain around her neck, next to the locket he had given her during their courtship. She lived 3 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. She finished her memoirs and gave copies to each of her children, wanting them to have the full story of where they came from. And when her time came, she went peacefully, in the house Vincent had built, in the room they had shared, looking out the window at the ranch they had created together. Sarah's great-granddaughter found the final entry in her journal, written just days before she died. It reads simply, "I came to Montana with nothing, running from loss and pain. I found a cowboy who offered me a home with no strings attached. I found love, family, purpose, and peace. I found everything I never knew I was looking for. If I could go back and tell that frightened young woman standing in Helena what her life would become, she would never believe me. But I would tell her to be brave, to take the chance, to trust in the kindness of strangers and the possibility of love. Because sometimes, when you think you have nowhere left to go, you are actually standing at the threshold of everything you were meant to have. My life was not easy, but it was good. It was full of love, and I would not change a single moment of it." The Garrett Ranch continued for generations, a testament to 2 people who chose each other when they did not have to, who built something lasting from nothing, who proved that love and hard work and courage could create a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed in the meadow, someone from the family would ride up and remember the story of how it all began, with a cowboy and a desperate woman and an offer that changed everything. "My home is yours if you will take it. No strings."